don't know. That's kind of up to everybody else. They can see that.
Yeah, I think we'll put front lights down just so everyone can see and hear.
Okay. Everybody hear me, I guess? All right. Okay. So I don't have to get through any presentation. I just have the PowerPoint that we used, the task force used at the last SAAs, that covers all of the topics that we talked about. Is anybody not familiar with the Airlie House 2 effort? All right, that's good. Either everybody's asleep or everybody knows what we're talking about. We had the original workshop in May of 2024, and there were 4 topics. I should probably go through the. Whoops, there we go. And so we focused on 4 topics after there was several surveys, several meetings to try to hone in on what things were important to focus on to have a viable CRM archaeology going forward. The topics were workforce training and career preparation, centering communities and inclusivity. That one has had a name change like 3 times since we started because most of the words in that title are now banned words that we're not allowed to use in public discourse anymore. And then archaeological collections care, including records, including digital records, and improving the practice of CRM archaeology. The ones that I worked on are the workforce training and the centering communities and inclusivity. And now on the task force, I am mostly working on the workforce training and career development tasks. All right, so let's see. I don't need that. This is a great picture of all of us. As you can see, everybody's face except for mine. I'm behind, in the back row behind somebody, and you can see half of my forehead, but still had to sign a release form for them to use this picture anyway. So I'll just go through. If there's any questions or any comments, just stop me because I'm going to ramble through this if nobody stops me. So a lot of the things that we talked about in the workforce development that covered things that have been successful, noting that there are more folks in academia, in departments involved in training, formal training, that have CRM experience. And so we have had some movement that is positive, but then there are also programs that have started and sunset within a 5-year period to meet the need for careers that are present now and, well, hopefully going to be into the future. Talked about structural and ethical issues, and then also developing educational pathways and the need to develop sustainable careers and provide stability for folks that are getting a degree or a graduate degree and wanting to actually be able to pay off their loans. So the actions that we talked about were starting more professional outreach to get students out there. We will need CRM firms and CRM archaeologists to engage more directly in outreach and sustained outreach, and not just project-specific outreach. Those are one and done kinds of things, and they don't build anything. It's nice to get that in your MOA or whatever for mitigating adverse effects, but it doesn't build anything that's sustainable. We need to have continual exposure, continually presenting this to the public and potentially interested future CRM archaeologists, so that they see that it exists, they see that it's a viable pathway, they see that it is something they can see themselves doing. And so we also will need academic outreach, and most of these most of these are dependent upon partnerships. We need CRM firms and academic institutions, academic units to have formal partnerships so that we make sure that we have alignment with the training that students are getting and what the industry actually needs. Because right now there are not very many programs that are targeted at and successfully provide training and experience in CRM archaeology, despite the fact that for the last 50 years, that's been where nearly all the jobs are. We're not training people to do the work that's out there. We're giving them a degree in anthropology and sending them out to be trained by CRM archaeologists on the job. That's not sustainable. That's not a viable way to develop an industry. That's also not the way that any other professional preparation program does it. You don't have phlebotomists learning how to stab people on the job, and they don't complain about that they're not doing research. We need to have people who can do certain kinds of tasks. We need to think about what is actually required to do the work. Do you need a master's degree? Do you need a bachelor's degree? Is that something that's actually necessary? If so, what do those programs need to include? And so we recently had an article come out in the SAA Archaeological Record that talks about it gives examples of some programs that are successful, are doing CRM training, preparing students for the job market, but also showing that, has anybody seen that? Okay, a few people, right? All right. And one of the things that we actually tried to do is we wanted to get some version of that published in a higher ed industry publication that administrators read, but those publications didn't want to talk to us. So we decided to develop something to how you would, if you're an anthropology department, how you would make your argument to your dean, to your department chair, to the provost as to how doing this actually advances the university's missions. What kinds of widgets that the university counts can you do better if you are doing CRM training, if you are doing having students gain experience directly in CRM archaeology. You can make money there, especially with grants now largely going away for anything that anthropology and archaeology would do. You can, if you run contracts, that brings in money. If you partner with firms and do some of the work with them, that brings in money. That brings in overhead. Universities run on overhead. So those are things that you can pitch to that. I will note, and I didn't respond to the question when he asked, Al said, this is great, except for that's in the future. That's a long way down the road to develop new programs. And then he asked, what do we do now? Any idea? Well, if you're interested, this is what we need. We need partnerships. We need folks in firms to engage with people who are trying to do the training, who are doing the training, and we need to find out, I need to know what you guys need. What are the people that are coming with a bachelor's degree in anthropology? What do they not have? Yeah. What? Okay. So the question was, or a statement, that the new hires tend to have the highest rate of injuries, and asking whether or not we provide training in safety. It depends on exactly what types of projects that you're talking about, because we tend not to. What? Yeah. We have safety plans, and we go over them with the students, and we have our procedures change depending on what the feels like or what bulb temperature is. And so we cover that. For my program, we don't teach. I'm in a university, but I'm in a research institute. I have taught classes before, but I'm not even a member of the anthropology department anymore. We are independent of the anthropology department. All I do is get grants and contracts and pay people to do archaeology. That's my job. I'm not an instructor. Group credits for the some of the SAA workshops, and have students come in and do that. We also try to have we're not doing it right now, but we are trying to have a regular speaker series where we've tried to have folks come in and talk about jobs, what kind of jobs are out there, and what kind of preparation they need to get that. That I don't know what they're teaching in classes for that, but and I didn't get any formal safety training. I learned about OSHA regulations by reading them. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and especially now we've had a lot of issues with heat in the summer. We're doing a lot of summer field work, and students they've never done anything physical outside sometimes. But I mean, for me, that's also where we do our best service, is by showing them that they really don't want to do this. Like, you might not want to get a 4-year degree in this, because the jobs that are out there you don't want to do. Sure, there are jobs out there that don't involve going out and getting lost in the woods in 110-degree heat, but those are rare. And so, we having students go out on these projects and learn that is one of the best things that we can do. It feels really crappy at the time, but if they can come in as a freshman, go out on a couple surveys and realize, yeah, I'm going to go get a history degree. That might not be a good idea right now, but any other?
I don't want to take too much away to continue your presentation, but so about forging partnerships, I wholeheartedly agree. And last night at dinner, some of us were talking about this and thought that really that's where it's going to have to come from in the short term. Internships, through companies that are doing active CRM. So, and I've also expressed that to the SAA leadership, to Chris Dorr, the new president. Mm-hmm. We've had a little chat about it.
Yeah, I mean, internships are good, but they are also difficult. I mean, even us managing an intern internally that's a Ball State student, there's a very high overhead for that. And so there are some firms that do have internship programs that work out really well, but with smaller firms, you can't necessarily guarantee that you're going to have stuff for them to work on during that. You can't guarantee that they're going to get fieldwork time. Most of the internships that I hear about from students and from folks in industry is they say that they can't put them out in the field. Just because of scheduling. It may be where they're working that they have different. I mean, in Ohio, you can do a lot of things in Ohio that you can't do in other places. And so if the students don't meet the minimum criteria for a field crew in Arizona, well, you can't take students out on a CRM survey in Arizona. But and we need universities that actually offer the training that is mentioned in the current qualifications, the SOI qualifications. There are lots of folks that get a master's degree in Ohio or Indiana or Kentucky, and they think that they're going to be able to come out and lead crews, and then they realize that they've never had a class on Eastern North American archaeology or Midwest archaeology, and they were trained to dig in burials in Romania, and that's never going to happen again. And so they have no practical field training, and they also don't know anything about the regional history and what the questions are there. So we need to convince administrators, convince departments to offer those kinds of opportunities. And what does that take? That takes money, and that takes butts and seats. And so if you got folks that you want to keep and you want to push them into a different level of position, come talk to me. What classes do you need? We can work to offer them. We can offer them as non-credit options. We can do continuing education things. I am working to develop a graduate certificate in CRM archaeology that can be an adjunct or a minor on existing graduate programs, so we don't have to completely revive our MA program. All of our graduate courses are still on the books, so we can offer them. They just aren't regularly offered because we don't award a degree, a master's degree in anthropology right now. But if you have students that need them, and they have money, or your firm has money to pay for their tuition, or to pay for the time of an instructor to do it, we'll do it. And it doesn't have to be me, but I happen to have the ability to do that. And I'm the one that's talking to you right now. So there was a question. Mm-hmm. So the comment was coming from a parks system, they encouraging folks to reach out to park systems for projects and potentially for help in supervising, managing the work. Is that fair? Yeah. And I would also point out, like, National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, they have programs that you can partner with them through a contract, and they have funds available. It saves money for the Park Service, for the federal agency, because they're not paying the full cost of the project. They're not going to an outside firm. There's matching costs involved, which CRM firms tend not to pony up for. And universities have lots of ways of throwing matching costs at contracts. And if you do some of those programs through certain kinds of challenge grant and cost sharing agreements with a federal agency, the students who work on those projects, that counts as federal work. They actually can, if they get enough hours in that program, they actually can qualify for internal only postings. They get hiring authority preference from doing that. And so that's another way for universities to, one, generate revenue, which your administrators will like, and two, provide a easier pathway for your graduates to get degrees in agencies, although I wouldn't put a lot of money on the future of agencies at the moment in the short term. Any other? Brian? Oh. Don't unplug it again.
Yeah, I just want to know if you and your team there looked at some of these few institutions that actually have done training, and like Hocking College comes to mind for me, and I don't have a lot of firsthand knowledge about that, but I understand they no longer have that program. But for a while, they apparently, I heard that they were producing a lot of fairly well-trained people to go into CRM. Have you looked into why those things failed, those types of efforts? Because that seemed like a really good formula. Just students?
Yeah, and that was exactly what I was going to point out is I know both Ohio and Indiana have these processes going now where they're going to eliminate programs if they don't have enough graduates. How do we convince these deans and provosts and all these people that archaeology is a niche and it's very important to have, you don't need a large labor force compared to accounting or something or engineering, but you need that labor force or else that's a bottleneck for infrastructure and many other things that we need just because of the way our historic preservation laws work. So.
I mean, the answer, how do you convince them, is money. And so if you've got folks that need to level up in their career to take that next job, if you have incentives for your employees to get that extra education, if you support them through that, then there will be people there to teach them that. If we don't find ways to put money into the system in ways that the universities are counting it, it's not going to work, because one, it's social science or humanities, and those programs are low enrollment, high effort in terms of instruction, and so it's really hard to keep those open because we don't have the Bio 101 classes that have 500 people in them. That's how you have departments that are stable. They have massive classes. And we just can't do that. But if there is money that is available to do this, it doesn't have to be 4 credit courses either. It's just, that's not what the SOI quals say. There are certain things that you have to have a degree, you have to have this, you have to have training or experience in North American archaeology, or for the Indiana ones, you have to have training or experience for a year under a qualified professional in Midwestern archaeology. Well, you can't get that at most of the Indiana universities. IU does not do research in the Midwest. Purdue barely does research in the Midwest. So you are not getting the classes that you need. You can take that as a continuing education course or something like that. So we can work out ways to offer content that isn't credits, that isn't going towards a degree. But what we need is buy-in from firms. And another thing that we have talked a lot about is with partnerships is bringing folks from the firms into the classroom, either as guest lecturers or as instructors. And so we can have courses, small courses, irregular schedule courses, so that we can work around work schedules. We need to find ways to get people into these classes. We need to find ways to get money into these programs. And that's not going to happen with just the faculty doing it. We need the firms involved. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think the biggest hole is at the undergraduate level, because by the time people are even considering graduate school, they're considering if they can even afford that in the first place. So a lot of people are trying to enter into the workforce. So I think if we focus on undergraduate programs and trying to find ways, like you said, to incentivize whether a student could get credit taking one of those courses and it could count for credit instead of taking something else in an anthropology department, or, you know, most undergraduate anthro programs require a field school, which can be extremely cost prohibitive even for those undergraduate students. And if there was an option, if there was partnership between CRM firms of, we'll take, you know, when we have a larger project or even on smaller projects, even if you're getting paid to do it at a, you know, a field tech level, that can count towards actual instead of field school. I think that would help, because I think obviously, like you've been saying, cost is one of the biggest factors. So if we can start at an undergraduate level where you have the highest number of anthro students, those all fall off usually after undergrad when they can't find jobs. So if you actually prove to them that this is an option in a field, and even if it's something that's offered to the wider other departments, like people who are interested in conservation, if they could somehow, you know, go out and get a credit doing something cultural resource management related, you know, we might also attract people that way, because it's the same sort of people that enjoy being in the field for work. So I don't know. I feel like undergraduate's like the best way.
Yeah. And with field schools too, I mean, field schools are exclusionary. They put up a lot of barriers for especially poor first generation college students. If you're doing it during the summer, 6 weeks, they lose their summer job. They have to get another place to stay besides their home, and they can't get federally subsidized loans for credit hours during the summer. So if you're offering a field school and you're only doing it during the summer, you're only letting rich white kids in, and that's not sustainable. That's not going to work. We need other options for doing that. Credit for work. I haven't done anything with this yet, but one of the things that I'm trying to look at is credit for prior experience types of things. And so students who have done 10 weeks of phase 1 shovel testing with us and haven't taken a field school can take a couple of academic assessments and get credit for learning and credit for that work that they did. But that was also their summer job. They got paid the entire summer. They didn't have to get a new apartment. They didn't have to pay tuition. They didn't have to take out more unsubsidized loans. They made the money that they would have spent on tuition, and then they just pay a fee to get it put on their transcript, and then they take a couple of assessments in the classroom. And we could potentially do that with work that has done outside with folks not at Ball State. If they're working for you over the summer and they have we can have partnerships with firms, with PIs, with field directors, and pre-qualify folks as instructors. And you can say, the instructor can say, the supervisor can say, they can do this, they've done this, they've passed doing this. Then they come to a anthropology department or a university of some kind, and they take the assessments, academic assessments, and pay to get their credits put on their transcript, and they have a field school, and they didn't have to go to Romania to learn how to dig Roman burials, and they will never see again. Yeah.
I think like another point to add would be some specializations in CRM like GIS, GPR, deep soil testing, bioarchaeology. All of those types of classes are offered in the graduate level, and maybe getting like GIS offered in the undergrad level, but also those classes are usually in other departments as well. So making a GIS for CRM class offered by the anthro department might bring more students in.
Well, and that raises an interesting point too. Something we encountered recently. I have a new employee that we just hired. He has a PhD in environmental sciences. He was a graduate assistant for us for like 5 years. He's done all kinds of lab field work, writing reports. The SHPO is fine with those reports that he's been lead author on. And then when we applied for listing him as a field supervisor, they said, well, can you give us the syllabus for his GIS course? Because we don't know that they covered the same things. Well, I took a geography GIS course and didn't ask me for that. And so we have some issues with evaluating folks for qualifications. I realize that this is not Indiana, but we have to think bigger and collaboratively. We're not going to do this with just anthropology. If I can get the graduate program working in some way again, they're going to be taking classes in environmental sciences. They're going to be taking their preservation law course is going to be in this architecture school in the already existing historic preservation master's program. I'm not going to teach that course. I'll teach Midwestern archaeology or something like that, or I'll teach research design and field methods or something like that. And so we need to use all of the resources, but most importantly, we need firms to partner with academic institutions, and we need money to do it. And so if you have folks that you want to level up, invest in them and keep them working for you. The hardest thing that I've heard from folks is getting the people in. It's like, we can teach them to do most of the things, but if they don't have the qualifications, then we can't do that. We have to revisit those qualifications and see if they're actually necessary. Some qualifications certainly are, but I don't think that the current ones are necessary in all cases, but we're also not going to have any success at revising SOI quals right now either. Okay. So if you have any questions or you want to talk about any of this, come see me sometime today.
Will you be presenting on this again at the SAA next year?
We're not doing a presentation. Yeah, sorry, forgot. We're not doing a presentation, but we will have an open day. I think it's Thursday. We have a room reserved for folks to come in and talk to the task force. And we are also, we just got a Winter Grin workshop grant. And so we're going to have another meeting with partner organizations. And so as we're working on the volume talking about this, the workshop and the action items, we're going to bring in partners and try to see if we can include some active plans in the book that we're working on. But don't wait for that. If you have an idea, if you have resources, come and find somebody and we'll do it.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, and a quick comment from Nancy White. Many universities are now evaluating which programs cut based on how many graduates get jobs. Maybe faculty can argue that CRM industry is growing and has a lot of jobs, at least it was until recent sidelining, which is also true, right? There's opportunity. All right, we have about 5 minutes. We're going to set up next for our forum on best practices and identifying and evaluation of archaeological sites. We have Jared Burks joining us remotely. Also, we have Alex Corkum, Thomas Grooms, Kevin Nolan again, Joe Schneider, and being moderated by Al Tonetti. So take a few minutes, get some water, coffee, use the restroom, and then we'll come right back to this in a moment. All right, folks, in the interest of time, we're going to keep this moving. I appreciate your quick moment of allowing us to get things set up, but I think we are once again up and rolling. We are hopefully presenting online. Everyone can see and hear us all right. We have a roundtable discussion. And again, we are being joined remotely with Jared Burks, who is somewhere else in the world right now. I like that "Where's Waldo" kind of thing. So I will hand this over. Again, we'll ask that our speakers and Al speak into the microphone. And if we have questions from the audience participation, that we pass the mic around for that. Can we confirm that folks online are hearing? Someone give us a thumbs up if you're online and can hear us okay. Sound check. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, it always worries me a little bit when we have to transition like this with lots of moving parts. But anyway, here's Al Tonetti. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Yeah, just leave that there. I had, when we were talking about having this anniversary conference, one of the things that I wanted to do was to have kind of like a roundtable, just a forum about best practices in archaeology. And so I asked these gentlemen and Jared, who's with us from Cambodia, to participate in this 1-hour forum. So before we get into this, I just want to read a couple of things, and then we're going to, Thomas Grooms is going to, has a statement. So best practices, what are they? So we define basically best practices as methods that are efficacious, in other words, they're effective and superior to other methods because they yield better results. And the results we're talking about here are identifying National Register eligible archaeological resources, and they are economical. Once demonstrated as best practices, they are adopted by practitioners and regulatory agencies and become standard practices until new best practices are developed. So the agencies we're talking about here are primarily the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which kind of oversees the implementation of the Section 106 process, mostly by federal agencies. And in their Section 106 regulations, they allow the applicants for their assistance, such as cultural resource firms, to prepare information, analysis, and recommendations. But in the end, the federal agency, they are still legally responsible for all of the findings and determinations that the consultants make in their reports to them. Now, the role of SHPO in the 106 process is to represent the interests of the state and its citizens in the preservation of their cultural heritage, and they also advise and assist federal agencies in carrying out their 106 responsibilities. They also cooperate with agencies, local governments, organizations, and individuals to ensure that historic properties are taken into consideration at all levels of planning and development. So again, I want to stress that when an investigation is conducted by an archaeological consultant, the agency, the federal agency, they remain responsible for ensuring that the work of those consultants meets certain standards and guidelines. So I just want to preface the forum here with those words. So Thomas, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you. And then Jared, we're going to go to you next. And then we'll have Alex and Joe. And Kevin doesn't have, if you want to say something, you know, I'll say, okay, he'll chime in, believe me.
Do I need to stand up to the side or wherever? Just one is. All right, so I'm going to start. This is a kind of a difficult question to answer, this notion of what is best. For us at SHPO, you know, it will vary depending on the scope and nature of the undertaking, the local environmental history, current and historical land use, the number and type of archaeological resource present, not to mention time and budget constraints inherent in CRM. So best practices for the identification of archaeological resources, in SHPO's opinion, is the development and execution of a well-designed, well-developed research design that proposes appropriate survey methods to identify archaeological resources in the APE. So SHPO relies upon the expertise and experience of the archaeologists developing these research designs and executing them to determine what's the best methodology to identify archaeological resources within that given APE. Obviously, we understand that CRM is a competitive industry and stuff, and often money dictates methodology. But even within that framework, there should be some flexibility, and SHPO is very open to flexibility. And if you're ever cautious about changing, deviating from the guidelines, give us a call. There's only 3 of us. I'll give you my personal cell phone number, so just call us. Or maybe only, we'll see how many of us will last. But okay, so anyways, we try to provide specifics in our letters, in our consultation, but at that phase 1 level, oftentimes what we're getting is basic information about the project, the agency, what's going on, maybe a map. But so we will just say, phase 1 survey is required. Again, it's relying upon the consultants out there to kind of take that beyond just where's our guide, where's the guidelines, what's the standard methodology. Okay, so what I will see is a common shortfall in phase 1 survey reports is that weakness of the literature review. It's an over-reliance on just SHPO's records, and you've got to understand our limitations of the SHPO data, especially those early recorded sites. Secondly, again, back onto the professionals. That's why we're having professionals go out there and do these surveys. They should have a familiarity with the literature, not only like this, early 19th, 20th century antiquarian, but they should have, professional and avocational journals. They should know some of that information. They should have at least a familiarity with that, and current research in Ohio. So I think from, again, this is all moving into, these are all parts of your research. Oh, the red light came back on. There it goes. The battery, though, really.
Of course it is, because why is it out?
My, not much more to really put on that. I was worried that this might happen, so we'll have to speak a little louder, and there are mics in the room that should be picking up now online, but that also means they'll pick up everything that's being said here, so watch what you're saying out loud, and slam the earbuds. And yeah, this is and I wonder how this comes in. I'm sorry, carry on. I'm just gonna really wrap up. The preservation is built on thoughtful and purposeful and careful work. There's not a simple test. There's not simple rules. What is eligible? What, how to the methodology used. It's just, again, research design, building a cohesive document, and building upon that background literature, basically, and your land use histories and stuff to really kind of just, you're the one out in the field, you're the one making that decision, and then transcribing that into a report and telling us what you did, how you did it, so we can kind of get a good sense of, you know, did you do the adequate, you know, your good faith effort to identify historic property. That's it. I'll pass it on to Jared. All right. Okay, you got a replacement. Yeah. You started again, all right. Should be on. Jared, can you hear us?
Was that, hey Jared, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? More important. I cannot really hear you guys. It's like I'm underwater, or maybe on the other side of the world. Can you guys hear me?
You're very faint. Give me 1 second.
Hold on, it could be me.
Yeah.
How about now? Can you guys hear me now? No.
Use your outdoor voice.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me?
Jared, can you try again?
Yeah, can you hear me?
It's better.
That's better? Is it good enough?
That works.
Okay, I can hear somebody talking perhaps on a microphone. Okay, you ready?
Go.
All righty. So thank you, Al, for inviting me to chat for a little bit and participate in the forum. I, of course, want to talk a little bit about geophysical survey and one topic in particular, if I can get my slides to advance. They do not. That's nice. Let's try that. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I would like to talk about geophysical survey being used at the phase 1 level, so to identify sites and cultural resources, and kind of one aspect of that, one focus of that in particular. But I just wanted to let folks know, if you don't already know this sort of thing, that geophysics has been in use in Ohio for a long time, on a regular basis since the 1990s, especially by the Park Service, and then more recently in the 2000s, and kind of at the scale of the phase 1 survey since at least 2012. And at that time, it was with pushcart magnetometers. And these days, we now can tow these magnetometers, I think, as everybody knows. And the scale of coverage is now massive per day, not too much different than the scale of a team doing a pedestrian survey in an agricultural field. So 40 to 50 acres per day. Now, of course, we're not detecting objects, we're detecting archaeological features, ideally below ground. If you happen to have a larger magnetometer array, we can go bigger than 50 acres. Now, this kind of survey coverage requires particular settings in which that can be done, like nice grassy lawns or large agricultural fields that are clear of vegetation. I wanted to focus more specifically on the use of geophysical survey in a phase 1 setting when mounds and earthworks, mounds and enclosures are part of the APE. This is, I think, perhaps not just best practice, but one could argue a requirement. This is often what our work areas look like, APEs, open agricultural fields. The earthworks are not quite as visible as the Newark Octagon and Observatory Circle, and sometimes they're not even known to be within the project area. So I would argue that shovel testing and surface collection were never designed to find earthworks, and in fact, unless you already know the earthwork is there, they're very, very unlikely to find mounds and enclosures that have been plowed down. Maybe people can find them by noticing subtle topographic differences, but it's not the sort of thing you readily see in shovel testing. And earthworks tend to not have artifacts, so that those things we key in on during surface collection may not even be there. Okay, so let's see. So the best practices, I would say, for when you think you might have a mound or an enclosure, an earthwork of some sort within your project area, or even next door to your project area, aerial photograph, there are three things that really one should do, starting with area photograph review. This is stuff that we all kind of do, but I don't know that we necessarily do it at the level we should be doing it at. There are lots and lots of resources now online where one can get many, many, many aerial photographs of a project area. So Google Earth, and for Ohio, that means about 1994 to present. The USGS's Earth Explorer website, which is often the 1940s to the present, is very good in the 50s and 60s and 70s. The ODOT historic aerials are now all online and very easy to search. Now they don't have full coverage for Ohio, but some of the key areas have lots and lots of coverage. So those really should be reviewed. And one of the cool things about the ODOT historic aerials is they were taken at times of the year that are different than a lot of the USDA and other kinds of government photos were taken, because ODOT was interested in roads, not really that interested in agricultural production and the way people were using the landscape. So different years represented. So you never know what you might find. And earthworks often show up really well in these photos. And then, of course, getting those older aerials is not easy still. The 1930s aerials, which are available for every county in Ohio, are present at some county engineer office and soil water conservation offices. Some of them have been digitized. And, worst case scenario, you may have to go to the National Archives if that's possible. That may be, well beyond our level of effort here, but aerial photographs are key, and you often can assemble 20 or 30 of them in a time sequence for your project area. So this is just one of those earthwork sites. This one was spotted by David Lamb in kind of the area near the border between Pickaway and Ross County, so in the Scioto Valley. And notice how often that earthwork shows up in the aerial. Not so often, and sometimes only a little bit of it. But when you look at these time sequences of photos, it's pretty easy to pick out the geometric shape there. And I don't even have hardly any of the Google images in here. There are lots and lots more images one could put in this sequence. That, of course, was all georeferenced in a GIS. So aerial photographs, please do it. Not just look at one or two or just Google Earth, but certainly Google Earth and some of these other sources. Nowadays, LiDAR should be automatic. It's very easy to download stuff that's already been gridded and pull into GIS, or lots and lots of other platforms, including free software that can work with these already gridded LiDAR data sets. And now, like, the whole state is sub-meters, so it's perfect for looking for earthwork sites, some in extremely high resolution. So this is sort of an old example, but we work, of course, in urban contexts, but also in more rural contexts, but they can be super useful even in urban contexts. And this is another one of Ohio's lovely golf course examples, the Columbus Country Club in southeastern Columbus. And there's an earthwork in there called the Columbus Country Club Mound. It did show up in the first round of OSIP LiDAR data, 2006, so there it is. If you go to the site and look at it, it's like one of the best preserved sacred circles in Ohio, although it does have some golf course architecture on it. And in the newer LiDAR, so the sub-meter stuff, it's exquisite looking. It way outshines the golf course features. And when you start looking around this thing, not too far away there, there's definitely another one in there on a fairway. So a place that should be flat actually is the shape of an earthwork. And once you have access to the LiDAR data, you can do things to it to enhance subtle topography, such as a local relief model. Here on the left is the known Columbus Country Club mound with a ditch and embankment. And on the right is the new one that the new LiDAR data revealed. Now, we haven't been able to do geophysics here. They haven't allowed us. I've asked many, 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 many times. But you can see they're roughly the same shape. They have the same sort of ditch and embankment. So pretty good chance that's an undocumented earthwork. See the distance there? Not too far away, but about 200 meters away. And then, of course, geophysical survey. This stuff is excellent for finding earthworks in Ohio, especially the Scioto Valley and into southwestern Ohio. It's a little more subtle in southeastern Ohio, but things still show up. Magnetometer is generally the first choice, and in part that's because historically it's been the most available to Ohio archaeologists, but also now it's the one that's been scaled up the most, so you can cover the most ground effectively and cost efficiently with these. But don't forget that earthworks don't always show up to the magnetometer. And nowadays there's towed GPR, not as much coverage as magnetometer, but very, very high resolution. And electromagnetic induction survey, so like conductivity survey, that's becoming more of an option in Ohio. You can tow those things, but just standard kind of walking along the landscape is how it's done a lot of the times these days. Where does geophysics work on earthworks? This is a previously unrecorded site that was spotted in a Google Earth aerial image by Harry Campbell back in, it was 2014 or 15, so a good 10 years ago. There it is. There it is enhanced just a little bit. You can see that geometric shape pretty readily. And of course, to the magnetometer, it's night and day. It's super easy to see this thing. And lots of components related to this. And in particular, what I wanted to point out was the thing in the middle. So that was probably where a mound was. The mound is long gone, been plowed away, but the features underneath the mound are still there below the surface. And so in particular, when looking for that earthwork type known as a mound, we're talking about stuff that's no longer visible at the surface. And there's thousands of these across Ohio that have been plowed flat, never were maybe very tall to begin with. And what we need to key in on are the things below ground. So things to keep in mind for best practices when you've got mounds or enclosures, some kind of earthwork in your APE. Earthworks occur in clusters very often, even if only one has been recorded. Others are likely present. For example, in the background here, this larger circle wasn't actually previously recorded, but when we started surveying it, voila, more enclosures nearby. And so within sites, there may be more enclosures, but also these enclosures tend to cluster together within areas. So we have found, and Dave Lamp can talk to this too, that within like 1 mile, there often is another enclosure, perhaps where there's a confluence of a creek and a river or something like that. So if you're within the right amount of distance of a known site that's confirmed, it's a good chance there could be another one somewhere in the vicinity. And as I mentioned, plowed down mounds are going to be the most difficult target to find. The mound itself may not show up, but the stuff beneath the mound is what we need to really be on the lookout for. Lots and lots of burning happened before the mounds were built. So the floors of the mound may be intact, the submound crypts, even post-mold patterns of post circles that the mound covers or structures. So that was my last slide. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing now. And I think now you guys are in control.
No. Oh, I thought you meant. I'm going to just a moment again. We have technical This one. Yep. And I swear we'll get this. So, my first trade archaeology project was. It's not.
Can you guys hear?
Wow. It's not as sensitive as the other one was.
So
So, sorry. So how do you typically approach these things? Phase one is satisfying through these two methods. Sampling and scale. Both of these methods tend to be pretty low density, tend to be pretty low accuracy. And it depends on the skill of the load phase scale. I mean, that's something that Kevin was.
we tend to send out people with the limited amounts of experience to do these surveys, and they have a pretty limited depth of investigation. But the question is largely, does that matter? Is this good enough? And I would say that the answer depends often, as most things in archaeology does. You know, I had a request this week, in fact. A person buried 2 bags of silver in their yard. They shot it in with a Garmin, and they can't find it again. And that's sort of the issue with sort of accuracy. Even if you've done something fairly recently, if you're not operating with a level of precision, you're unlikely to find it again. All right. Okay. So often we need to choose the appropriate methodology. So this is actually a failure, typically by geophysicists. Geophysics is often viewed as a black box, right? So I get requests for GPR all the time. Often that's not really what's appropriate or even what they think they're asking for. It might be magnetometry, it might be electromagnetic induction, maybe it's earth resistance. Maybe they're just looking for topographic data. I get asked for LiDAR data when it could be satisfied through photogrammetry. And it's a lack of understanding and communication between geophysicists and archaeologists. And that's certainly a place that we have room for improvement. Because often sites are pretty complex, often more complex than you realize going into it. So this is Zor Hotel in Zor, really awesome place. We had a pretty good idea that there was going to be a foundation there. We were very surprised by how much else was out there. And it would be very challenging to sort of investigate this to the level of efficiency that we achieved here through sort of traditional archaeological means. And they tend to be dense and systematic. So these are the other two sort of key points of geophysics. If done correctly, you're going to yield a dense data set. You're going to investigate multiple depths, and it's going to be accurately located. So cemetery with a church, earthwork, and then this is electromagnetic data. This is 1/2 of 12 data sets generated by a single scan. So the CMD6L generates a tremendous amount of data per scan. And honestly, as commercial archaeologists, what we really care about is efficiency, a function of time and amount of data generated. This is a historic farmstead. It's been demolished. There's nothing topographic there. You wouldn't know walking around that there's a farmstead there, but the magnetometer can detect it easily and define the limits of that deposit in hours. So it is hard to equal this level of data density in the same amount of time expended. And this can be done by a single individual. So Jared was talking about 50 acres a day with magnetometry. Absolutely possible, particularly in the correct environments. If you've got a large open field, it's very hard to beat that in any other way. But again, it does need to be ground truthed.
So we typically solve this through probing. This is a great example. We can, with the right sampling system, you can actually punch right straight down through FCR and sample the burned earth below. You can get remarkably good carbon samples out of it. And it means that you have a surprisingly good depth investigation. These were, as you can see here, between 80 and 100 centimeters below surface, quite deep, quite a bit deeper than would likely have been impacted through shovel testing. It's hard to generate that sort of data in a traditional sense. So I guess this is the talking point. Typically, geophysics only happens, or very rarely does it happen, at any other point than phase 2, usually when SHPO has requested it. Maybe we should consider flipping this narrative a little bit. So this is geotech, but at Terracon we have something called the Smart Exploration Plan. It's a silly name, but it's a good idea. We lead with desktop review, as all of you do, I'm sure. But we do geophysics before anything impacts the ground surface. And that's because we typically don't want to drill more than we have to. And the geophysics is a faster, easier way of identifying risks beforehand. And I would argue that the same could be true for archaeology. We can efficiently find cultural resources and then investigate them in the traditional sense. It's not a replacement for traditional archaeology, it's supplemental. Because the coverage and the density of data, it's just not possible through traditional means. And we have opportunities for sort of landscape scale insights into land use and site distribution that really isn't possible through traditional field walking or shovel testing. I know I only had 5 minutes, so that was a lot of information into a small amount of time. But thank you for your attention. I'm going to hand it off to Joe, who's going to talk about some really cool stuff. I'm actually more excited about his presentation than I was about mine.
Don't oversell it there. Alex.
No, they'll be exactly the same.
How's this? Maybe the arrow keys seem to be. Do I just press the mouse? Okay. Okay. Oh. Excellent. How many archaeologists does it take to? Thanks everybody for being here, and thanks Al for asking Alex and I and other participants to participate in this discussion. I'm glad that Jared talked about ODOT aerials earlier, because I'm also going to talk about ODOT aerials. Don't have a ton of time, so I can't get into really deep specifics or methodologies here, but I hope that everyone in the room is aware of the potential of remote sensing data as far as archaeological sites are concerned, especially monumental architecture sites like this place that I hope everyone recognizes. But I often, as Alex sort of alluded to, we get requests and problems and questions from people all over the country dealing with decidedly less monumental archaeological sites, a lot of cemeteries. So I'm going to begin with cemeteries and shift into other sorts of archaeological sites. But I want you to pay attention to the center of the frame there. This is a institutional cemetery in Tuscaroras County. It doesn't look remarkably different from the surrounding landscape other than it's mowed in nice clean rows. But if we look at that elevation data, my eye is immediately drawn to the very north there, where I see a sort of repeating pattern of depressions. This is the new OGRIP LiDAR data that's just plotted in hillshade. Something that's really useful is to look at that data in a different way, like plotting it in a simple local relief model there. I hope that's even more obvious than it was in the previous slide, that we've got repeating human-sized depressions in the north of this cemetery that are more than likely graves. And I should comment right now that these are topographic anomalies until proven otherwise. Until ground truth, these can only be anomalies. The same is true for geophysical results. Speaking of ground truthing, you might say, well, you didn't show us any ground truthing evidence for that cemetery, but we did here. This is a pre-Civil War antebellum African-American cemetery in North Carolina that we recently surveyed. You can see the limits of survey there. It's a wooded area. And unfortunately, unlike Ohio, we're very lucky in Ohio, I should say, for a great variety of reasons, but particularly for our access to historic aerial photographs and really great LiDAR data. It is so easy. If you work in other states, I'm sure you understand our pain when we go to other states and have to deal with poor quality data and data that's difficult to access and yada, yada, yada. We got it good, guys. This is North Carolina data. I'm not sure the age, but it's fairly low density, as you can see. And in fact, we processed this ourselves. It wasn't even ready off the shelf. And that's what you get. If we plot it in that simple local relief model, I hope you can see, I guess I should also say, this is plotted in grayscale. So light colors are high in elevation and dark colors are low. So I hope you can see some sort of repeating, again, human-sized shaped there in the middle. And maybe that's not incredibly clear, but they do correlate with radar anomalies that we have interpreted as graves. To get a little bit closer back to home, this is in Michigan, but a little bit lower in density. Here's another cemetery. Not terribly remarkable. The LiDAR data is rough. We process this ourselves. As you can see, it's pert near useless. But if we plot that with a simple local relief model, I hope you can all see repeating patterns, again, sort of helping us define the boundaries of this thing before we even get in the field. I want to shift from LiDAR to photogrammetry, and I don't have time to explain all the differences, but LiDAR can see through vegetation. Photogrammetry cannot. There is only one return, essentially, from photogrammetry. So you get what you get at the surface upon exposure. When possible, we like to fly everything that we survey. So we have current orthorectified aerial imagery, like you see here, but also so we have elevation data. We find, especially in historic cemeteries, especially in minority cemeteries or in institutional cemeteries where neglect is maybe occurring on a greater scale, that grave depressions are essentially an independent line of evidence when truthing or trying to determine where the unmarked graves are in these cemeteries. So it's essentially a second instrument. It's incredibly cheap. I should add that aside from hardware, all the software I've used for everything in here is completely free. And if we look, this is that same cemetery, the sort of in the southwest there. This is a pauper section. This is Delaware, or Union County, I believe. There's radar data and depressions. If I can go back and forth here, I think you'll see pretty strong correlation between the two, and of course our final interpretive map. But that's all wonderful. That's current photogrammetry. That's something that we did the day before and processed the day after. But getting back to ODOT aerial photography, what if it was possible to extract information from these sort of legacy data sets, if you will, that is no longer there? This is a place, I hope maybe some people can recognize that. The aerial is not incredibly remarkable, but that sort of circular thing near the intersection there is a sort of remarkable place. That's Tremper, which of course was excavated and restored to some unknown extent based on those excavations prior to any aerial photography, I'm afraid. But this is the modern data. This is the new LiDAR data of the site plotted in hillshade. This is simple local relief model, just again, another way to plot the same data. What if we looked at those ODOT aerial photographs, and if there was enough coverage, could we perform photogrammetric processing on those aerials and extract a historic data set? We can. This is something like maybe 10 or 12 frames of ODOT aerial photography that was taken along the highway. That was something that Jared didn't mention, but it helps if your site is next to a highway or a railroad or a river. And in Ohio, we have lots of that interchange. This is aerial imagery. And again, this site is not all that remarkable in imagery, but in elevation data, it certainly is. If we zoom in here a bit, this is essentially that hillshade LiDAR data that you were seeing before, but from a 1967 data set. As far as I know, this is a really novel thing in North America. And plotted in another way, we can still see it. This is real. This is real information, real data. If we look at another place that I think maybe everyone knows, Mound City. This is current aerial photography, current LiDAR. You can see very crisp, very nice. This is a data set from 1993 that we put together. And I think you can probably see the edges of the frames there in the photo.
Okay.
Anyway, this is the aerial imagery from that site, and you can see sort of different levels of exposure per each frame. I'm afraid I threw these together a little bit last moment. That could be cleaned up, and it should look more homogeneous across the landscape for imagery purposes. But I think you can see that it's relatively clear. It's almost as crisp as current aerial imagery is via OSIP streaming services. So what about the elevation data? There it is. This is a 1993 elevation data set of Mound City. Of course, you can see here, this is a good example of if you got trees on top of it or buildings on top of it, you don't get the floor, you don't get the ground. So everything that was wooded at the time is obviously obscuring the earthwork. But you might note, but here it is plotted in simple local relief as well. But I want you to note how well, in particular, the outer embankment or enclosure is defined there compared to, let's say, the old OSIP LiDAR data where it's actually much, it's very poorly defined here versus that 1993 data set that we've been able to resurrect. And finally, to avoid being accused of only talking about earthworks, prehistoric earthworks, that is, I'm going to talk about a historic earthwork. This is Fort Meigs. This is what it looks like today. Here's the modern LiDAR data plotted in hillshade. I want you to keep an eye on that area enclosed in the box there as we proceed. Here it is plotted again in that simple local relief model. This is on a giant bluff to the north. For those of you who don't know, that's the Maumee down below. So this is pretty dramatic topography, but even so, this simple local relief is really great at enhancing sort of low profile topographic data. So if we start to look back through these historic aerial photographs, and these are just georeferenced in GIS for now. These are just single frames. What you can see, and what many of you knew, I'm sure, is that the site has not always looked like it does today. In fact, it was dramatically altered some years ago, which essentially spells out in these ODOT aerial photographs. And we're going to come back to this 1963 data set. But you can see here in 1968, these photographs are so wonderful because you can see things come and go and happen. You can literally see OHC building blockhouses and altering the site in order to interpret the earliest version of the fort, which is the much larger version that we know today. But when forces were drawn down, the fort was reduced into this four-sided little fortlet in the west, which unfortunately is no longer there. And if you recall the LiDAR data, the current LiDAR data, there wasn't really much evidence of this thing in that surface. This is where historic aerial data sets can really be useful because we can recreate things that no longer exist. So coming back to that 1963 aerial, we zoom in on that area. This is, I think, something like 7 frames stitched together in photogrammetry. You can see it's relatively clear and useful, but again, this is a topographic thing, so I want to see it in sort of a quasi 3D, and we can. It's real. There's real data there for this thing. This is just plotted in hillshade, plotted in simple local relief, just another way. It's real. It's there. I think this is a really wonderful thing. We're very excited about it, and I hope that this leads to all sorts of interesting discoveries and rediscoveries and retellings of all of Ohio archaeology. I think that was, well, there again, if you look, you can just barely make out sort of a 45-degree angle there in the center of the frame. But other than that, there's not much to go on in the modern data sets. So looking back at these historic data sets and sort of reconsidering maybe their full potential is something that I am interested in pursuing as a professional and interested in seeing others pursue as well. With that, I yield my time to Mr. Nolan.
Hello again. Yeah, everybody hear me? All right. All right. So I don't have a PowerPoint, and I love geophysics, love GIS. Those are really, really cool things. So I figured I could say something different, at least different than what they have said. I have said these things here before, but I need a costume change first. So I want to talk about evaluating resources. We need to get away from lazy evaluations using the archaeology criterion. To me, that is only for things that are new, things that you don't know about. If it's one of these earthwork sites that we're seeing, that doesn't have information potential. We know what it is. We know what's in there. We can predict what we're going to find. And so that is likely eligible, but we need a different reason for why that's eligible. There are 4 criteria for the National Register. Is there anybody in the room that's actually used all 4 for pre-contact? Well, I guess you can't really use B very much for pre-contact stuff, but we should not, and this is for SHPO and agency reviewers too, don't accept a report that says all of these archaeology sites are eligible because we're going to find tens of thousands of artifacts there for information. No, you know what those artifacts are already. You've done this before. So what is it helping? What trend in history or prehistory is it relevant for? Why this particular collection of tens or hundreds of thousands of artifacts? are the best example of this. So we need to actually do the mental work of making those arguments. I don't need to beat that dead horse anymore. But I also want to, I'm glad that there was some different kinds of uses, creative uses of data, but we don't just have geophysical instruments, magnetometry, GPR, resistivity. There's soil science information that we can get. There's geochemical stuff that you can look at. There are different types of magnetic surveys that you can use. And these give us different kinds of information about different kinds of sites and resources. And so, I mean, has anybody done a soil phosphate survey in a phase 1 on a CRM project? Why not? You want to find middens? You want to find places where people have been having organic materials decay for decades, centuries? What's wrong with phosphate? That's what you're going to find. And so we have other kinds of tools that we can use. And so I would love to see more folks use in identification surveys things other than magnetometry, other than shovel tests and pedestrian survey, because we can learn a lot more about them. And if we have had other impacts to the site, if the artifacts have been collected already or they've been plowed away, the chemical signatures can still be there, just like that mound. You can still see that in the magnetometry. So we have a lot of options for different kinds of things that we do. And I think the last thing I'm going to say is we need to look at our guidelines and make sure that we're not incentivizing bad archaeology. Because if you make the team who's actually going to analyze the artifacts and find things cost more than the competitor who got fired from the precursor lab of the lab that I now run at Ball State, who knows he's not going to find anything before he goes out in the field because that's what he does every time. Or if you see somebody who is a single person in a shop running 200 phase 1 surveys in a year, they didn't do those surveys. So your SHPO reviewers should not accept that report. Ask for a better survey. Ask for more documentation to show that they were actually out there. So we need to think about what we're incentivizing with how we do the work, because that's how we get bad practice.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We have about 6 minutes, I think. I have some comments to make, but you've probably already heard me make these kinds of comments before. So I just want to open it up to if anybody has any questions about anything that was presented or, all right, Dr. Richwine. I'm going to. Former archaeologist at the Ohio Department of Natural Resources.
Thanks. Thank you. I'm old school archaeologist. So what I would do first of all is I would talk to the landowner and I would ask the landowner about the land. I would ask the landowner, do you have any historical photographs of the area to see that that mound that has since gone might be there in an old photograph? I would also come here and do the 15-minute topographic map reviews, as well as the 1870s atlases. And then we would be able to see what exactly is going on there, first and foremost. The landowners have a lot of information. Talk to them. I would also then, if you have a lead, go to the township trustees. Do they have any historical information or photographs on the land or the area? I would then go to the County Historical Society and see what they had as well. And if you do that ethno-historical research up front, tidbits can come available to you. So that's where I would go. The other thing is, when I was working, geophysical just started on the scene. I want to know what is the deterrence for using that and remote sensing? Are there any? Or combined with other methodologies, I say probably the holistic approach is the best approach. Do the shotgun approach. Everything you can do up front before you go out in the field. Archival research is very important. Thank you.
Do you guys want to address any hindrances about adopting geophysical surveys or?
Deterrence. If you've got a waterlogged saline environment, GPR is probably not going to be terribly useful for you. If you have an incredibly wooded environment and you can't get instruments in because the client doesn't want to clear the land, then you probably can't do geophysics at all. There are environments that are not suitable to geophysics. And then you have to take other approaches. I would say, so, you know, often we recommend as many methodologies as we think are appropriate, but we aren't the only people bidding on these projects. There is a cost associated with every additional methodology that we recommend. So we have to be sort of efficient with our requests. What will get the most data for the least cost for your site? But I guess if that answers your question.
Have time for one or two more short questions if anyone has one. Eric Olson.
Yeah. So mine's more about the ground truthing aspect of it, and sort of you mentioned soil coring as a Alex specifically as a means of testing these things, and I think Joe, you also said we have to assume that these are anomalies that meet a certain that are cultural. So what kind of factors go into assessing, you know, which ones you pick to core, or do you core everything, or like what's the sort of triage situation of like which anomalies get tested for further analysis?
I knew Eric was going to ask that question.
Yeah. So my answer is probably very similar to what Jared would say. We rank our anomalies based on probability of them being cultural. And then it depends on how many we have, honestly. So I had a site that had 3,600 anomalies, just not really practical to test all of them. We had 900 rank 1 anomalies. It's just too many. So we need to take a representative sampling, and that's going to depend entirely upon how many anomalies. And ultimately, we're trying to say something about the site. So we can probably assume that many of these anomalies are related temporally, but we need to confirm that through coring. So we took carbon samples and we got dates. So yeah, it's a site by site. If you've got a small site, you've only got 20 anomalies, core all of them. You know, if you've got 4,000, maybe don't core all of them because the client's never going to pay for that. That answers your question.
Anomalies that you would not detect by surface collecting or digging shovel test pits. Craig Keener.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to those soil coring issues. I have some issues with that. But in my experience, that soil coring tends to be rather unreliable in defining anomalies of being an actual feature. And I would like to know what's changed here with geophysical survey experts, because over the past 2 decades, you guys have been pretty much adamant that ground truthing has to involve test unit excavation or plow zone removal in order to confirm that we have features there. Now, I know in some of the past presentations, we've been given some anecdotal examples of cores containing pottery fragments and burnt clay and rich samples of charcoal, just like you showed on your diagram. But in reality, what I've experienced and what many people in my industry experience are much more subtle cores that are not easy to interpret just from a core. So how are you going to be reliable as a testing procedure and not have a lot of miscalls just based off of a coring sampling method?
Yeah. So we do the coring ourselves, and the reason is when we're doing a magnetic survey, we're doing it with an RTK system. We're accurate to about 2 centimeters, so I can come directly down on top of the anomaly that I've identified. The issue often is you give a table of anomaly centroids to the client or to the consultant. They go out with their own GPS. Maybe they're not tied into the same datums that you were using. Maybe they're not using an RTK system. They do a core, they get soil, and they go, this doesn't work. We are about 70%. So about 70% of the anomalies that we identify in core have something in them. All of the anomalies are created by something. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's cultural, but there is something different about that location that's causing it to be an anomaly. It is by definition anomalous. So if you're not getting anything in your core, it's likely that you're not coring in the right spot. And that may be a precision issue.
Sure way to make sure that you have a cultural feature is to expose it, because I think we all have run into those feature plans that are very subtle. You have to sometimes wet it down to even see the feature matrix. We're running into fill caps with some of these features. 90%, I mean, I hate to use a percentage, but 90% of the features I've run into over the years are just slightly modeled subsoil matrices that may just have a slight amount of charcoal. And the only way you're going to determine whether that's not a tree root or a root stain, or whether it's a full-fledged pit feature, is to get in there and do the test unit excavation. And that has been done by a lot of people. And I know you and I think Jared's been advocating now soil coring. Is that what the industry, what other geophysical survey experts are advocating as well? Or is this just something you and Jared are advocating?
Final answer, because we had to move on.
Hey, I am still here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Jared, go ahead.
I couldn't hear what Al just said, but I think he said, go ahead and talk. So, hey, Craig, good questions. And I've never thought that coring was a means to like 100% positively identify anomalies. It's a means of narrowing down the range of anomalies that might be archaeological features to those that at least have things that are consistent with cultural features like charcoal, burned earth, and all that. And for sure, there's stuff like burned trees and other kinds of burning events that are not related to the kinds of things we're interested in finding that we detect. So there are lots of opportunities for false positives with coring. And so coring is a means to start the process of narrowing down. But this is like at the phase 1 level, so locating quote unquote sites. Coring is kind of a quick way to narrow the field and rule out things that definitely are not, at least based on the coring, cultural features. You're maybe talking more about a phase 2 sort of level, and yeah, test units are going to be a more definitive way. And we all have stories about how even when you open up a test unit, I think you even mentioned this, it's super hard even to tell just by looking at it. But when you have a geophysical signature plus coring and or some kind of test unit excavation, that should encourage you to keep digging, because as you mentioned, these things may be capped or filled, these pits anyhow, with subsoil, and you just can't tell at the base of the plow zone. But if you've got that geophysical signature to keep you digging, keep you focused on that, trying to figure out what's causing that magnetic anomaly, for example, then I think you're well along the way to having a best practice.
Expecting more out of that core than you are out of.
we're going to have to pause this conversation. It's really interesting, and I hope that we can continue to engage in these conversations because these all move the field forward. I appreciate all of your input here and our panelists, and thank you, Al, for putting this part together. Yes, I'm hoping that will be time. Yeah. Or if these are important things, these are, future meeting topics, happy to engage with this. I'm going to transition ourselves now to the business meeting. I'm going to stop recording this on Zoom. Anyone can certainly stick around through our business meeting. We're hoping to be brief. We will take care of a few OAC business matters, and then we will adjourn for lunch. I see that, so I'm going to stop recording.